Thank you so much for having me. It's really quite an honor to be in Kuwait. I've actually wanted to come here for quite some time, and it finally has happened. So thank you for having me. And I have a kind of strange talk today. I work at the intersection of a number of different spaces. So I work in the computer security field, but I also work as an artist, which is a strange combination already. And I also work at times as a journalist. And this work is largely about technology, but it's actually also about how, after a while, working with technology, I've found that it wasn't enough to just work with technology. I found that to change the world, to change the way that people think about things, we need to actually change society through culture, and I think that's very important. So I want to start off by giving you a motivation. So I'm from the United States, and as a result, I feel, let's say it's of supreme importance for my generation to recognize its responsibilities and its role in the world. So this is a quote from former director of the CIA, Michael Hayden. He says, "We kill people based on metadata." And you hear about it all the time. You hear about American drones attacking people and killing people all the time. And so most Americans actually didn't believe this was happening for a very long time. There's a kind of science fiction aspect to it where it seemed as if it were not true. So first I want to say, I'm really sorry about this. I think it's a great shame of my generation that we assassinate people without trial, and then we go ahead and we say that they were military-aged males. It really bothers me. There may be some people in the world who definitely have committed serious or heinous crimes, but without due process, it actually is extremely upsetting to me that simply because they're Muslim and young men, they get killed. That to me is an unacceptable thing. It should not happen. That is terrorism. So with that said, if they kill people based on metadata, I want to talk to you about getting rid of metadata. So I work on a project, it's called the Tor project. Some of you may have heard of it. I'd actually like to just know if anybody here has ever used it. Raise your hand. Fantastic, I'm so glad. I think there are a few people in Kuwait who use it on a regular basis. But it works like this. I'm so glad also that I finally get to use the slides written in Arabic in a way where hopefully someone will tell me the Arabic on them is correct. If I understand this correctly, Alice wants to send a message to someone on the internet. And so what Alice does is she connects to the Tor network. And what this means, you'll see why it's very difficult to actually talk about this in public, by the way. Alice wants to connect to the Tor network. She wants to be able to view a website which might be blocked or maybe has some discriminatory aspect. Like for example, you're here in Kuwait and you want to visit a website, but they block everybody from Kuwait from seeing that website. Anyone ever experienced something like that? Right, okay. So you can use Tor to get around that. Because what happens is that you build a connection from Alice, let's say, to Bob or whatever website you want to visit. And you no longer are coming from Kuwait. The first computer sees that you're coming from Kuwait, maybe, but it's encrypted. So it doesn't learn much except that someone in Kuwait, you, would like to have a conversation with another computer in the Tor network. And then from there it talks to another computer in the Tor network. And then from there it goes to the place you want to actually go to visit in some way. And right here, this part is the part which means that if this is in Germany or if this is in Iceland or in the United States, all of a sudden, the website you're visiting sees that you're coming not from Kuwait, but from somewhere else. And thanks to strong encryption, this is actually done in such a way that this guy here and this guy here, this gal here, they don't actually get to see the pieces of information. It's compartmentalized. So that means you're actually protected. It's kept as a secret. And that's a very important detail. In fact, it's what makes all of this work. And then the same thing is true when you visit another site and it wants to send data back to you. And the idea is there are thousands and thousands of computers all around the world that run this software. And as a result, you pick a bunch of computers at random every few minutes, and it does it automatically. So as a general survey also of the audience, who here uses a VPN? Right. So a VPN is, if we just go back here for a second, which is sort of breaking my rule, but a VPN is just this guy to this guy, normally, and you pay for it. And you pay for it in a couple ways. One way is that this guy promises that they won't log any data. Oops, they got hacked. They promise that they won't block anything. Oops, they blocked something. What are you going to do about it? Right? And you can see where this goes. That's a kind of what we would call privacy by policy. They make a bunch of promises, but the technology doesn't allow them to keep the promises. So this is a extremely important architectural change, which is instead of one computer that you connect to, or thousands of computers around the world that you connect to a single time and then go to the rest of the internet from there, instead you use thousands of computers all around the world, all at once, essentially, and then pick some at random and then compartmentalize the information. So someone sees where you're coming from, someone else sees where you're going to, someone else is the cutout in the middle that prevents them from knowing things about you. And all of the software in the theme of this conference, it fits with copy and paste. And the reason is because it's what we would call free software. And free software in this case is as in freedom, not as in free of cost. Although it is actually free of cost, that's not the point. The point is that the source code, the things that make it up, the specifications, we encourage people to freely replicate them, because none of us are free until all of us are free. And so to make that actually work, we have to actually have free software that implements all of this. So if you have an Android phone or an iPhone, you can just click and install this and you get it. And then you're a part of this so-called peer-to-peer network. Okay, so I looked at the statistics for Tor in Kuwait, and I found the following, which is about 1,500 people every day are using Tor, which is for a population that's not really a large country. I was actually quite surprised to see that. I hope that after all of you have installed it and you tell all of your friends that this number is 10 times higher. But that said, there are some examples of user interface design. In this case, it's just a web browser, but it's an anonymous web browser. And you see we have a graphic design problem. How do you signal privacy to people, for example? This is a really difficult problem. How do you tell someone about this in that? And one of the things that we really need to do is find a way to actually do that. And we haven't. Largely, though, we just tried to build interfaces like this, for example. This is an instant messaging program built on top of the Tor network that's called Ricochet. And you see it's like a buddy list here, and you have a username. That's me. I'm IO error sometimes. And you see this is the text window, and someone's typing a message, and so on. And effectively, what you see here is something that looks terrible. But what matters is the architecture underneath. The architecture underneath this means that someone can't censor you or spy on you. So for example, if we go back to this Michael Hayden quote about killing people based on metadata, when you chat with me using this system, using the Tor network, someone no longer knows that you're chatting with me, which means that if for some reason chatting with me would get you in trouble, that's now gone. So if you're doing a business deal, for example, or if you are doing anything else, I have no idea what is the culturally appropriate reference here, but let's say that there is a culturally appropriate reference for something which you're allowed to do. It's not quite illegal, but you wouldn't want your mom to find out, or your dad. This is an example where that kind of a system would be helpful. And also, it thwarts the CIA, which personally warms the cockles of my heart. So, but that said, it's very, very difficult to actually explain this stuff. And I think technology is terrible, generally speaking, at changing culture in a way where we understand it and we talk about it in a useful way, unless it's a room full of technologists. And I don't want to talk to a room full of technologists. So I want to talk about art now. This is an art piece by an artist named Hans Hacke. And some of you probably are familiar with his work, but this is the condensation cube. So it's a systems critique art piece, essentially, where the entire system is contained within the cube. That is the process of condensation. So the water steams, it beads on the glass, and then it falls back down, and again and again and again. And Hans Hacke is a super interesting artist, and he's very inspiring to me and an artist that I work with by the name of Trevor Paglen. Trevor Paglen is an artist who helped film the award-winning, Oscar award-winning movie Citizen4, and is just an incredible artist when it comes to thinking about surveillance and thinking about how we might think about surveillance. So this is another picture of the condensation cube, and it sort of gives you an idea about the whole system. So we thought, how can we think about surveillance? How can we think about autonomy, about freedom, about choice, where we're able to read what we want to read without leaving behind a permanent record that maybe will come back to haunt us? And we came up with this. It's called the Autonomy Cube. And it's an art piece that we've installed in a number of museums. This is one of the installations, I believe, in the Reina Sofia, which is a moderately large museum in Spain. In this case, it's built with open hardware called the Novena, 2 Novena devices, And it's inside of a plexiglass cube. And it does a couple of things, but one of the things that it does is that it actually is one of the nodes in the Tor network that I mentioned. So it, in fact, expands the institution, which is about free expression, about cultural expression of any kind. It's about making sure that people are able to actually see not only the artworks in the museum, but other things, for example, on the internet, to be able to speak as well as to be able to consume media. And it takes that and it spreads the reach of the institution to the whole internet. So it's no longer the case that you have to be in the institution's physical proximity to be able to benefit from the civil society benefits that this institution brings. So in this case, you can actually see some old autonomous art in the background. And here we see a close-up of these boards inside. This is at the Reina Sofia again. Here we see, I believe this one is in San Francisco. We have another one also at the Vit de Vit. And we just recently opened at the Edith Rus House a very sort of extreme version of this. We thought, what would be the best possible way that we could show the world such a system? So what we decided to do, which was kind of novel, was we made not only a computer that relayed traffic for the whole world. So right now, if you are a Tor user, you have probably used our museum piece to actually go on the internet. So using Tor right now in Kuwait, you route through several museums where we've installed these computers, which is kind of nice because we feel like we really put those museums in a position where it's not just about their local constituents, it's really about expanding for the whole world, this idea of autonomy. A lot of surveillance art, what it seeks to do is to normalize it. Some of you have probably seen surveillance art where you take surveillance and then it shows the surveillance and it makes it better and it helps you to become comfortable with it. There are some exceptions, for example, things like CV Dazzle, where you paint your face a certain way and it makes it so computers can't recognize your face anymore. Or for example, the drone burqa, which is one of my personal favorites, where because you're wearing it, it actually hides your thermal signature, which makes you harder to see. So in other words, these are art pieces that resist surveillance. And we're in a similar tradition of resisting surveillance. So for this particular museum, we have 4 of these computers, and they're all hooked together in a particular manner, which makes each of them equal. So if one of them were to break, we can use the other ones to repair the others. And in some cases in an automated fashion if we wanted. And it's again inside of a plexiglass cube. And this is one of the people helping us to construct it. His name is Mason. So he's actually helping to wire together a few of the boards. That's me basically working on programming it. And this is where we're wiring together some power circuits. And this is Trevor Paglen, the artist that I mentioned before. And this is a close-up on the board. You can see this symbol here, the Novena symbol. So the idea is that we wanted people to be able to replicate this device, right? So again, in the theme of copy and paste, we wanted to do something you normally don't have in the art world, which is we wanted to have a thing which, given the instructions, you can build it yourself. And part of the value of the art piece is that people do this, because this is only useful if there are other computer systems around the world that also relay traffic for the Tor network, that also protect users, that are also in museums, in libraries, in schools, wherever it might be. And so you can see here a nice little thing, which is by this, there's an iPhone in the picture here, for those of you that are in the back, and it's using the wireless network we installed in that museum, and it gets routed through the cube. So it's not just helping people all around the world. If you're in the space, you actually have access to an anonymity network without having to install any software at all. So Banksy says, in the future people will be anonymous for 15 minutes or something like this, right? And we thought, hey, what a great idea. Let's make that happen. So you can go to the museum and you can engage with it and you can see the anonymity in a sense, but in another sense, you experience the anonymity. So you understand what it means in that moment to be able to go and do something online, and whatever it is you've done, whatever Google image search you might have looked for, if you used a device that you've already used, you might leave a trace of yourself behind. If you start to take a little bit of effort, you can actually stop leaving traces of yourself behind. And the network itself then takes care of other aspects, which is kind of nice. And it also helps us to visualize it, so you can actually see this object. So then we installed this plexiglass top, as you can see. Trevor in his very fashionable Slayer t-shirt. And this is the actual cube, and it's the biggest one that we've built yet. And we decided that it wasn't enough to actually just install the autonomy cube. We thought that what we would really like to be able to do would be to explain about these types of things. It's really not enough just to create an art piece which you can interact with. Sometimes people really want to dig in. So we created a few things, but one is this visualization here. This actually shows you how much traffic is going through one of the devices. So it gives you an aesthetic, which is an established aesthetic in the sort of computer underground hacking community. And we put it on the wall of the museum as well. You see here, some people are actually on their phones. It's rarely do you want, when you make an art piece, to have people pick up their telephone, unless they're taking a picture of your art piece. But you know, in this case, whenever we saw someone using their phone, we were actually really happy about it, because usually it was because they were actually using the device and thus contributing to what we would call the anonymity set. In other words, the more diverse set of people that use it, the safer everybody is, which is what we wanted. And you can see this from a distance. And here, there's the little bit of a hint that there's something else going on in this space. This is an Ethernet cable that connects to a wireless access point. And so the whole space, including probably for several city blocks all around it, it actually has a wireless network called Autonomy Cube. And if you join it, then you're routed through the Tor network. So you would pretty much instantaneously have access. And in Germany, there's a really funny problem, which is you're not really allowed to have free and open wireless, mostly because of copyright concerns. And so as a result, people don't leave their wireless network open because they'll be held liable if someone were to download a film or do something on the internet. But in this case, it doesn't trace back to the museum. It traces back to the Tor network. And there's an exception, at least this is our read of German law, could be wrong, which would be hilarious for us, but more funny for everybody else. But the basic idea is that you get then not only anonymous access to the internet, and not only does someone not know that you're in the museum, but actually you get access, where previously you would not have had access. So that in itself also gives you something where you see the internet again. So we help you to see the internet, where previously people would not allow you to. We printed up some flyers, and in this case, this is a very interesting artistic representation of a prime number, because we wanted to sort of tell a little bit of the story of Tor. And this prime number is a very, very large artistic representation of a much smaller prime number, but it's the prime number that the Iranian government banned when they wanted to block access to the Tor network. And that prime number is essentially a banned prime number. So if you go to Iran and you make a connection between some different computers and you use that prime number, the connection will be attacked by the Iranian, I think they call it the potato wall, and it will block that connection. So naturally we fixed that inside of Tor, but for a long time there was a special number. It's essentially like a magic number that we figured out that if you use this magic number, then you will no longer be able to connect to the internet. And we thought that was interesting because if you look at some of the history of mathematics, for example, discussions about irrational numbers, for example, people talking about certain things, certain numbers, certain concepts became banned. And we wanted to sort of play with that a little bit. So that you can see this graph again. And in here we had a reading room. So these are a series of books. One of them I wrote with Julian Assange called Cypherpunks. It's not a very good book, but if you wanted to download it from the internet, I would encourage you to pirate it. And over here, there's copy and paste it. And over here we have a series of classified documents, which myself and other people worked on releasing, some of which are related to the Edward Snowden disclosures. And so this is basically let's call it a declassification reading room. And so we wanted people to be able to come and see what was actually happening in the world. We wanted them to be able to understand what was going on, who was involved, who was culpable for these kinds of things. We wanted to show when Michael Hayden talks about killing people with metadata, what that actually looks like. What is the plumbing of that system? And so we had this as the reading room as well as some computers so you could continue to, let's say, learn more about these details if you were interested. And here's some more printed material in here as well. Of course, you can learn about how Tor is designed and some of very important anonymous communication systems designs as well. And here you see the prime number again. And we had a series of viewing rooms where you could stand underneath acoustic sort of isolation devices. In this case, this is one of the sort of, I would say, one of the kind of amazing public intellectuals on privacy and data protection and just like modern society, Kate Crawford, having a discussion about, I think in this video she's talking about data privacy. And in here, actually, Laura Poitras, the director of the film Citizen 4, and myself are giving a talk at the KS Computer Club in Hamburg. And this is William Binney, a whistleblower from the NSA, who revealed mass surveillance that was taking place inside of the United States. And so the idea is really to be able to steep yourself in this culture to understand what's happening, to understand the relevance of the sculpture upstairs, to understand why you would need to protect yourself. I mean, everyone tells themselves that they have nothing to hide or something like this, but it's really something, the discussion we're trying to have is a different one, which is not about whether or not you have something to hide, but whether or not you have something to lose, whether or not you care about other people, whether or not you want to help take care of those other people, what that might look like if you had control over your own self. And of course, we modified parts of the museum as well, because it wasn't enough to just to make some art. So for example, we covered up all the surveillance cameras with a little teeny piece of paper because it seemed very inconsistent to have a giant workshop and a whole bunch of art about this without actually doing that. Which additionally, we made the entire museum free. It's not normally free. And so anyone could come. And here you can see a press photo of Trevor and myself in front of the bandwidth of the machine. And this is this here is what's called a Tor exit node. So it's actually one of the places where you can reach out to the rest of the internet using the Tor network. And because of that, you're able to freely communicate anonymously all around the world. So with that, I hope you enjoyed my presentation, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Jacob. Very nice. في أي أسئلة? Any questions?
I imagine that there are organizations around the world that are very uncomfortable with the work that you do. How does that place you as a person? How do you feel about that? And also, what are the ways in which the Tor project is potentially attacked? And how do you guard against that?
I think some parts, there are definitely some places in the world that are not pleased about the work that we're doing. I think Michael Hayden is personally really unhappy about it. And that, like I said, makes me very happy. If there's a set of people on the planet I can imagine making unhappy, and that should bring you joy, it's definitely people in the CIA that are into assassinations. I'm a very big fan of that. That said, it does create some tension. And this is part of the reason that we try to emphasize an important detail. It's not just the assassination squads at the CIA that we hope go blind from this kind of protection. It's that we want people to have a choice no matter who those people are, no matter what. Not based on whether they're white or black, Muslim or Christian, or anything like this. We want everyone to have the ability to protect themselves, to actually have a secure internet. And that's very important. And overall, that even wins over some of the staunchest, hardcore, unfavorable people, like not Michael Hayden directly, I'm sure, though it would be very funny if he was a Tor user for me personally. It really is the case, though, that we win over people who would not, it's a big tent, let's say, and there are people in this tent which you wouldn't believe that are in that tent. And the reason is because the only way that we get this protection is if we all have it. So Tor is, of course, attacked. There's a lot of press-related attacks where people, for example, try to suggest that we're terrible people because we give other people protection. So for example, in the United States, it's canonically the case that people always talk about Muslims having privacy protection and how that's a big problem. And I think personally, that's really disgusting. And so I usually say, yes, that's right. We should stand up for people that are in that situation. They should have privacy even if they're not Americans, even if they aren't Christians, for example. And you see the same discussion happening in a lot of societies where the enemies of that society are considered as subhuman. And so, of course, every society that has those enemies, we end up being said as if we are aligned with them when the person who loses power because of our system sees it. The users of the system are on the opposite side of that. They feel empowered. They don't have to pay a third company anymore for this. They actually get the privacy protections they always thought the internet had until Edward Snowden ruined that delusion for them. And so, it definitely makes for some strange situations. For example, the Iranian intelligence once broke into some computer systems, or someone associated with the Iranian intelligence broke into a computer system. And in their break-in, they actually mentioned me by name, saying that I should mind my own business. I don't think I'll be going to Iran anytime soon, which is too bad, but you know, they've got great architecture, nice people, good food. That's how it goes though, you know? The Chinese, for example, they also have done some attacks against the Tor network, but we like to emphasize an important point. Governments that try to restrict your access to the Tor network or try to, I don't know, say destroy art like this, which hasn't yet happened, they're not attacking us. They're actually attacking the users who want to protect themselves. It's directly assaulting their freedoms, their desire to use these things, for whatever reason that they might be using the system. Part of the reason we put the autonomy cube into existence and why we put it in museums is actually kind of counterintuitive, but in the West we have people who want to create and have in fact created almost total surveillance state. And in that total surveillance state, it's not perfect, and it's not imperfect in your favor, let's say. So we wanted to make sure that if art museums could be used, then we could make it so that if the police wanted to take away your ability to have free speech, for example, or to take away your ability to express yourself or to read a thing without being tracked, they would have to kick down the door of a museum and on video camera, potentially, destroy a piece of art, which would show them to be the fascist thugs that they are. And that's important also as an art statement. And we thought that if we could combine those two, that it would also create a tension where they would not want to do that because no one wants to be perceived in that way. There are corner cases where what they're concerned about are very serious, but on balance, with 7 billion people on the planet, because there are some people that will act badly with their freedoms, we probably shouldn't imprison the rest of the planet. But the Western authorities tend to not take that so well as a discourse. And that's part of the reason we made it as a piece of art, because we wanted to force that and to say, you're allowed to do this. The rules say that you're allowed to do this. The basic ground rules of society say this. And we want to do this because there are more people that need this help. Good people don't have other options for privacy and security on the internet, especially for free, and especially where anyone can implement it if they'd like. So,
thank you. Thank you for your work.
Yeah, thanks.
The question?
I commend you very much on your work, and I'm certainly going to use the Tor project. But I'm going to play devil's advocate and ask you a question, which sort of turns the table. Do you ever find yourself facing an ethical question if you're actually helping people to be free, while you could be also helping people, from the tyranny of the fascism of a state or whatever system, that you could be helping also people hiding in order to be able to commit a crime?
Yeah, so my canonical example of this is, like I said, wouldn't it be sad if we learned that Michael Hayden used Tor?
Or Daesh.
For example, right? It is the case that is, it's a real concern that we have to consider. But ultimately, when we try to imagine building a system, let's say if you tried to imagine building the same system where you could capture the bad guys, you put yourself in a position where anyone who can put that into play, anyone who could use that, is now the vulnerability of the system itself. So if you look, for example, to Greece, you see that there was this thing, the Vodafone telephone scandal, where a man that ran the telephone systems was found hanged to death in his apartment. And as it just so happens, this person, he was the weakness in that system. He was able to wiretap people, he was able to monitor people. So that creates a really bad situation, and we don't want to do that. So the trade-off is that sometimes some people who may, for example, US soldiers who are not the best US soldiers, or for example, people who are really doing something where the majority of them are okay. For example, in the United States, police officers that are committing violence against people of color, if those people were to use Tor, it would really break my heart. It's really a sad thing. But how will all of the other people also have these protections if it isn't the case that sometimes some of those people will also get it? There isn't an easy way to deal with that. And since we're thinking about the internet as a whole, it becomes even more difficult if we consider that you don't just have to worry about local populations or local bad guys. Anyone the whole world over can use electronic systems to compromise them everywhere. So you really need this privacy and to recognize that the internet creates a multipolar world, so you want secure systems. So basically what we're trying to build is a secure system that helps everybody to have the security that they need, which ultimately is a very strange position to be in because it sounds like something no one would argue against. But it turns out that there are some people that like surveillance so much and they benefit from it that they're not going to have a serious conversation about it. They have a very disingenuous one. And many of those people, by the way, especially police in Europe and in the United States, they actually use Tor all the time while simultaneously talking badly about it. So they need it to do their job, and then they have to sort of badmouth it, either by saying it's weak, or by saying people shouldn't use it, or that it's only used by bad people, which is funny because they're using it. I'm not sure what they're trying to say, but so I mean, we do have, of course, an ethical conundrum there, but I think the correct balance is that good people have an option. And that if we take away Tor, for example, there was a woman, she comes from a city in Syria called Homs, and she came to one of our meetings and she said, I use Tor in Syria every single day to stay alive. And I said, well, you know, we're really humbled, we're glad that it could help you, and if we take away Tor from this woman, we aren't going to make anyone else that's maybe victimized on the internet or someone who's, let's call them the canonical bad guy, we're not going to be able to keep her safe, and we're also not attacking the root cause of what might be some criminality somewhere else. So we actually make the world a worse place by taking away the thing that helps her, and we don't solve the actual other problems. So we want to obviously solve the other problems, but we want to continue protecting that woman, whose city, by the way, no longer exists. Yeah. So I think I have 40 seconds.
Yep.
Yeah. Is there another question? Last question. Great.
Last question.
Thank you. Thank you for your lecture. So basically what you're doing is creating a new landscape within the existing landscape of the internet, where people can exist in without being noticed. Like you're creating these electronics nodes that you can that can be accessed without being nobody knowing you that you're accessing these nodes. So my question is, can anybody increase the nodes? Like,
Yes.
can I make a node and make another node, you know, like that?
Yes.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm really glad you asked that question, because one of the things we'd like to do is to bring the autonomy cube to places around the world. And so if you know of an art museum that would be willing to host such a thing, that's something we would like to do. We want to bring these everywhere for the whole world. But you can also install some software on your computer as well. That's how it's gone. There's like 6,000 people that run these. We call them volunteers. And these volunteers run what are called Tor relays or nodes. And you can do that. Part of the reason that I mentioned the art piece here, though, is I really am trying to find places all around the world, diverse cultures, diverse backgrounds, but especially in the artistic world, to actually bring this piece all around the world. And in fact, it would really shock a lot of my American friends if when they used Tor, they came through a Kuwaiti art museum. And it would blow their mind. It would be amazing to them. Just the same way that in one day of being here, I've sort of had a lot of perception shattered as well. So it would be great. And if you want to talk with me about that afterwards, I'd be very happy to talk with you about that. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Jacob, very much.